Okay, we are in Acts chapter 24 this morning, at verse 25. Acts chapter 24, verse 25. The verse reads like this: "And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, 'Go your way, for this time, when I have a convenient season, I will call for you.'" Now, to set the stage for what this verse is actually talking about, we're jumping into the middle of the context. Paul, in this context, had been in jail. He's been in jail because the Jews thought he had profaned the temple, or at least that's what they accused him of. It was a trumped-up charge. Paul had not done this. He was going to be in jail for 2 years. He couldn't get a fair trial. The Jews wouldn't let the Romans release him, but the Romans wouldn't stand up to the Jews and release him anyway. The Romans were the ones who had the real power. But because they feared a rebellion, they did nothing. 2 Roman governors had no charge with which to accuse him. This one, Felix, and Festus, that would come after him. No charge. This governor, Felix, can be described as using really 3 adjectives. We could describe him as amoral, A-M-O-R-A-L. That means unprincipled and has no moral character whatsoever. We could describe him as immoral, I-M-M-O-R-A-L, and that is because he lured away another man's wife. His wife Drusilla, he married, and she was married to somebody else before she was married to Felix. So we could describe him as immoral. And we could also describe Felix as corrupt. Why? Because verse 26 says what Felix was hoping to gain from Paul. He hoped that also money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the more often and communed with him. So Felix wanted a bribe. He would have set Paul free. He could have set Paul free without one. But he wanted to make a little money, which Paul would not do. Paul would not bribe his way out of jail. So Felix is amoral, immoral, and corrupt. But Felix did hold Paul's life in his hands. He could have sentenced him to death, and obviously he could have released him. So we might ask the question, why did Paul preach to Felix? Why did Felix have Paul preach to him at all? Felix didn't really know about Christ, didn't really have an interest in Christ, but Felix allowed him to preach. In fact, he didn't only allow him to preach here, he communed with him many other times after this. Did Felix want to be entertained? A lot of people today, they want to be preached to, they want to be entertained. And a lot of people are leaving the church today because they are not entertained. Preachers teaching about things that they don't want to hear. So, did he want entertainment? Well, perhaps. Did he want to see if Paul would incriminate himself? That seems rather logical. That Paul they couldn't charge him with anything, but maybe he would speak long enough to give Felix an excuse to keep him in jail under Roman charges. Well, perhaps it was that. Or perhaps it was curiosity. Paul is said to have profaned the temple. That's unique in one sense. He knows a little bit about the Jewish religion, but maybe he wants to know a little bit more. So those are the reasons why Felix could have, and of course that's all just speculation. The fact of the matter is Felix did have Paul preach. Now Paul could have stood in front of Felix and been angry for the way he was treated. A lot of people would be angry. They're being held in jail for something that they did not do. And moreover, they're being held in jail when the judge should have known better. And so he could have been angry at his treatment and really scolded Felix for allowing this. We're in Acts 24 for those who are just coming in. Paul could have been stubborn and refused to speak at all. There's a lot of people who won't teach, won't interact with people because of something that they have done. Paul could have been that person. Said to Felix, well, you're keeping me in jail. yes, I have the words of eternal life, but I don't think you're deserving of them. I've been stubborn. Paul didn't do that. Paul could have been crafty and preached a soft lesson to Felix. He could have come along and not really told Felix much of anything. You can find that in sermons too, where you can go away and wonder, what did the preacher actually say that was of any substance? Paul could have done that. He could have told Felix that you're okay in sin, nothing really wrong that you have to correct. Could have done that, but he didn't. Paul could have been diplomatic and intimidated by Felix. After all, Felix did hold the power. And therefore, he might have been able to eloquently condemn sin, but sort of couch it in a way that Felix wouldn't be too offended by it. And so that's the story. But Paul preached what Felix needed to hear. Paul didn't preach baptism. A lot of people might be surprised. Baptism saves. Baptism is for the remission of sins. But baptism's one of the last things that are taught about. Felix had no idea who Jesus Christ was. Didn't know that there was a right and a wrong. He didn't know the consequences for doing wrong. And he didn't know about the reward for doing right. He had no foundation in the Scriptures. So to begin with, baptism is sort of like picking up a novel and telling people, read the last chapter first and tell me what happened in the story. Sometimes you can get parts of the story, but you can't get the full story without the entire, starting at the beginning. So Paul preached to Felix what Felix needed to understand. He needed to learn about righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come. And the thing is, after Paul preached this lesson, Felix understood it. He trembled at it. But Felix didn't obey. He said he would obey later, when he had a more convenient season. And I suggest the devil made sure that there was never that convenient season for Felix to obey. We do not know what happened to Felix, but the Scriptures don't say he ever found that convenient season. So, knowing what Paul preached about, let's consider Paul's sermon to Felix. So, first of all, Paul taught about righteousness. Some people do not know that there is right and wrong. It might be foundational to us, but a lot of people don't know. They lie, they steal, they hate, they commit fornication seemingly at will. And they think nothing of it. We expect our politicians to lie to us. That's how bad our society is. We don't expect our young people to live pure lives up until marriage. Now, Christians should, and the children of Christians should be taught that, but the world thinks nothing of it. People don't know the difference between right and wrong. The world has absolutely no problem with sex outside of marriage, with same-sex relationships, no problem with that, with multiple marriages. There have been some movie stars who've died lately, and they've had multiple husbands or multiple wives. People think nothing of it. You can go to people's Wikipedia page, and on the side it has spouse, and it has bracket S. That's the society we live in. Spouses, because, and it doesn't matter what page you're on, they could have one spouse, and it still would have spouse with the S in brackets. That's the society we live in. Society has no problem with prostitution on the whole. Yeah, we might not like certain types of prostitution, but our society has sort of allowed that to institutionalize. There's tax money everywhere. And so if the prostitutes will charge tax, we'll let them buy. Society has no problem with polygamy if it is free will and not child abuse. Society has a problem with child abuse and forced marriages, but really doesn't have a problem with polygamy. Doesn't have a problem with taking money if you don't get caught. Corruption. Politicians and workers sometimes will do this. And they have no problem with lying. This is the one big thing. If you are protecting yourself, you can lie. If you're going to avoid trouble, you can lie. If you want an advantage, you can lie. Today's world is amoral. The A-M-O-R-A-L. Really doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. But these things are wrong in and of themselves, the things that I've just described. The world should naturally know better. What society can be built without stable homes and marriages? How can children be raised successfully without parents? How can people be secure physically, emotionally, financially, and socially when homes are being torn apart over and over and over again? We have financial poverty from broken homes. We have juvenile delinquency from broken homes. And we have educational dropouts from broken homes. Yes, that's not 100% of the cases. But invariably, I saw when I was a teacher, the kids who would have the most difficulty in school, I'm not talking about academically, I'm talking about behaviorally. Usually you could trace that back to the fact that the kids didn't have parents at home. Either their parents had left each other, their parents were never home, so they never got the discipline. And so we're dealing with homes that are that by choice, not that by necessity. We find that. We find the kids that act out sometimes may not have, their parents may not have enough money to send them for lunch, and they get grumpy because they're hungry. And we have all of that because we have broken homes on the whole. Moreover, what spouse wants to share their mate with anyone and everyone? That's a society that accepts that. I don't know too many husbands and wives that just willingly go out and say, well, yeah, you can go out with anyone you want. The world should know better on that. And what society can stand on lying and dishonesty in government? Where lies, when politicians are caught in lies, invariably it causes harm to the society that they're trying to lead. And when banks and other businesses lie to their customers, what was the big problem 8 years ago? The big problem was people were lying and cheating with other people's money. And so the world should know these are wrong in and of themselves, but they don't. And you notice I did not go to one Bible verse to show that these things are wrong, that they are not right. In other words, I was teaching about righteousness. And I didn't even go to a Bible verse saying the world should know these things are wrong. But the Bible does teach about right and wrong. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. There we read, Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetousness, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. This is one of the verses that the world likes to call, these are the Bible's sin lists. But it starts with, Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God. What does it list? It lists sin. These are the types of sin. This is wrong. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 2, the Bible teaches about marriage. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Notice, that word own is there. Husbands own their wives, and wives own their husbands. It's not an unequal relationship in that regard at all. The Bible's teaching about husbands and wives being together. Colossians chapter 3. In Colossians chapter 3, Paul describes what Christians are to do. Let's read verses 5 to 10. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affections, evil concupiscence and covetousness, which is idolatry, for which things' sake the wrath of God comes on the children of disobedience, in the which you also walked sometime when you lived in them. But now you also put off all these things: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communications out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. Paul here describes how we once were. But he says you are to put off those things. You are to put off sin. And what are you to put on? You are to put on what is right. Let's read verses 12 to 14. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels and mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, also do ye. And above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfectness. That's what Christians are to put on. We are to put off unrighteousness, and we are to put on righteousness. So Paul preached to Felix about righteousness, and Felix understood it. But that's not all of Paul's sermon. Paul taught about temperance. Temperance is sometimes called self-control. In other words, Paul is telling Felix he needs to control himself. The world doesn't think that we can always control ourselves. We cannot tell young people, or old people for that matter, not to drink alcohol. That's too hard. What does the world say? Don't drink and drive. Drink, but if you drink, don't drink and drive. And now the new commercials that I've heard on the radio is warning drivers that even after 8 to 10 hours, the next morning you shouldn't be driving either. It takes about 12 hours to get the alcohol out of your system. People didn't know that before because that's why we're starting to have the ride checks early on in the morning, because people are still show the effects of drunkenness. Christians should be saying don't drink. Forget about don't drive. Don't drink. But that's a hard thing to tell the world. It's hard to tell the world not to be sexually pure, to be celibate outside of marriage. That's hard because everyone's doing it. It's hard to tell the world. You mean I have to control my body? I don't know if I could do that. It's hard to tell the world not to lie, cheat, and steal. We sometimes say, well, sometimes it's okay. In other words, if you were asked over to someone's house and they asked you the question, how was dinner? And dinner was they burnt everything. It was charred. It just didn't taste good. Sometimes we try to be nice, but we shouldn't go try to be nice to the point that we lie. Sometimes I might say, if I don't like something, well, that was different. And it was. Didn't say I didn't like it. Didn't say, now you know, yeah. If I say I didn't, that was different, that might mean I didn't like it. But you try to be polite. But at the same time, we shouldn't lie. If someone says, did you really like it, and you didn't, there's ways of saying things, but we shouldn't lie. We shouldn't lie to protect someone else's feelings. Again, there's tact. There's ways to say things so that you don't discourage someone, but don't lie. There's never a time to cheat. Never a time to cheat. Never a time to steal when it's just okay. It's a tough thing to tell the world. It's never a good time to do these things? No. The truth is, though, we can control ourselves. We do it all the time. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in that parking lot, a car comes along, I don't step out in front of it. Now, some people do, and that's why they get hit. But I don't step out in front of the cars in the parking lot. I can control my legs, and my brain can say, don't do that. I can control the fact that We don't all go and decide that I'm going to grab a pen and gouge Tim's eyes out. Sorry, Tim, I picked you. I have control over my body not to do that. I have self-control. We don't all go and steal Naomi's purse. We have control over our bodies to do that. We can control ourselves if we want to. The truth is also we expect others to control themselves. We expect others not to steal what is ours, not to kill us, not to lie to us, not to be unfaithful as a mate to us. We expect that too. We do believe in temperance, and we believe it can be done. But the key word is we have to try it. We can't just come along and say, well, I expect this of others, but I'm not going to expect this of myself. We expect it. And the Bible, too, says that we can control ourselves. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, let's read 24 through 27. There we read, Know ye not that they which run a race run all, but receive the prize? But one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain. And every man that strives for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they that do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run not as uncertainly, so fight I not as one that beats the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. We know. Paul is saying here, every man who strives to win is self-controlled in all things. If I'm running a marathon, I've got to get in shape. That means I've got to eat properly. I don't eat properly right now. I'm trying to lose a little weight. And that means I'm going to have to change what I'm eating. But if I wanted to run a race, there are certain things I have to eat in order to have strong muscles, in order to have endurance. I have to exercise too. I have to get in a routine where I'm running so many miles or so many kilometers a day so that I could run that race and finish it. If you took a look at what the sports athletes do to prepare for the games that they play, you would be amazed. They work hard to be able to do what they do at such a high level. It requires self-control to do that. It requires giving up some things that people might enjoy to do that. Jesus said we can control ourselves. In Matthew chapter 5, we won't read them, but in 21 through 22, Jesus said we can control ourselves when it comes to murder. We're not to murder others, and we're not to be malicious in our speech towards others. Jesus said we can control our sexual urges in 27 to 29, not to commit adultery, but not even to lust after someone else. Verses 31 and 32 of Matthew 5, we can control the fact that of the divorce. He spoke on divorce. And that if we control the other things, divorce shouldn't happen. Shouldn't be divorce for every cause. We can control our tongue when it comes to lying and dishonesty. We can control our actions when it comes to revenge and cruelty. And we can control ourselves in that we are not to hate other people. We're not to hate our enemies. That's hard. A lot of these things are hard. Lusting. People might say, well, it's not that hard not to commit adultery. I can do that, but you don't lust either? Well, I can don't be cruel to other people, but I can't even take revenge. I can't even hate. Jesus said we can control ourselves in those things. We do not have to let ourselves go. We can and must control ourselves. So Paul was preaching to Felix about self-control. This man needed self-control. He didn't have it, but he needed it, and he was taught that he could have it. And the final thing Paul taught about was judgment to come. The world still grudgingly believes in judgment. Parents still do bring their children up. They do discipline them. Discipline has changed. I've been to stores and sometimes I see the kids are running the parents. That's not how it should be. A 9-year-old should not be able to tell his parents no, and the parents say, okay. Parents aren't out for their children's harm, or at least most parents aren't. If a parent says something, the children should be doing it. And there should be consequences for not doing it. I'm not saying that the children need to be beaten, but children do need to be disciplined. The world still, in some cases, will discipline their children, even though it's becoming more rare. That's judgment. Discipline is judgment. Schools still have tests. Final exams in high school are 2 weeks away. Tests are just another way of saying we are judging your knowledge in the class that you are taking. It's a judgment. You get a grade, you get a judgment. You got 90% or 70% or 30%. That's the judgment of the teacher as to how much you learned based on that test. We still have judgment. Societies still have laws. We still have police. We still have courts. We still have judges. The world doesn't like to be judged. No one likes to be judged. But the world still has it, even if it's shrinking. Common sense should tell us that there is a judgment coming as to how we live our lives now. You might say, well, if there was no judgment, why do we exist? And where are we going? We are leading a purposeless life. That's what we were studying in the book of Ecclesiastes a few months ago. That our life is vain if there is no God, if there is no judgment. Atheists tell us all the time, when you die, there is nothing to look forward to. You're just dying. I don't know why we go out and seek all the knowledge that we do just to go out and die, although I do believe one thing, that people are looking about the way that they can cheat death. That's really what some scientists are doing. They're trying to understand the universe so they can figure out a way to not die, even though that's not possible. We are not infinite beings. We do die. Our bodies die. But we have a purposeless life if there is no judgment to come. How do we prevent man's cruelty to one another? After all, might makes right if there is no judgment. Why is murder wrong? I just shortened the life of somebody. But in the end, he wasn't going anywhere anyway. So, have I done really any harm? I took a few years off of his life, but it's not like there was any peace after death. He just doesn't know he exists anymore. How do we prevent that if there's no judgment to come? And if there is no reward or anything better for us, whether we live or die, whether we're good or bad, all are going to be treated the same. If that was said about things in this life, people would come back and say, that's unfair. Well, no matter whether I'm good or bad, the bad people are going to receive the same reward or lack of reward as the good people. You told that to a classroom of children. Everyone's going to get the same thing at the end, no matter what they do. Society has done that in the fact that it's very hard to fail a course in high school. It's very hard. Taking away that penalty. It doesn't matter whether you get a 90 or a 30. We'll get the guy up to 50 or the girl up to 50, and everyone will pass. You start seeing the decline, the attitude of even the kids who are academically inclined, saying, well, that's just not fair. I put in a lot of work, and I get no different reward than someone who doesn't put up any work. Yeah, people, if there's no judgment to come, that's what is happening. People say, well, that's depressing. If there's no judgment to come, then life is depressing. Bad things happen in this world, and you can't explain them. And you can't seek any comfort anywhere. And people would say that doesn't make sense. There's nothing else out there. I keep hearing science, well, they will reject God, but then I heard a couple weeks ago that this universe could be a simulation from a higher being. This world can just be a simulation. They'll believe in something that they cannot see or prove, and then mock the Christian for the exact same thing. when it comes to God. The truth is, they don't want to obey God. And that's why they reject God. It's not because there's no evidence for his existence. It's that they just don't want to look for the evidence of his existence, and they want to reject the evidence. But the Bible does teach that there is judgment to come. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and in verse 10, there we read, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that which he has done, whether it be good or bad." Everyone is going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. There is not one person who's going to escape it. Adolf Hitler is going to stand before. Osama bin Laden is going to stand before. Barack Obama is going to stand before. You and me are going to stand before God to give an account for what we have done. Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 and 13. "And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged of the things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works." We are not going to be judged by someone else's works. We are not going to be judged by what our country did or what our church did. We are going to be judged based on what we do. And the standard is Jesus Christ. Not our own works of what we determined as good works. No, the standard is Jesus Christ. We are going to be judged by an all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful God. In Acts 17, verses 30 and 31, "And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he has ordained, whereof he has given assurance unto all men, in that he raised him from the dead." God knows what's going on in this world. He is all-knowing. He is all-seeing. And he is all-powerful. He was able to raise Jesus from the dead. That's who we're going to be judged by. We're going to know that this judgment that is to come, there will be punishment for the wicked and a reward for the righteous. In our last verse this morning will be Matthew chapter 25. We're going to read verses 31 to 34, and then we're going to read 41 and 46. Matthew 25, beginning at verse 31. "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, and the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Verse 41. "Then shall he say unto them on the left, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." In verse 46. "And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal." That's the judgment that is to come. There is judgment to come. None of us can escape it. This is what Felix was taught about. Now, maybe in different, like as far as Paul didn't have all of these chapters and verses we went to, but he reasoned the same way. He told Felix, "Felix, you are an amoral, immoral man. You need to learn about righteousness, the righteousness that comes in Jesus Christ. Felix, you are an intemperate man. You need to learn about temperance. You need to learn about self-control. And Felix, you need to recognize that there is a judgment to come. That you are going to stand before God to give account for the things that you have done, including keeping me here in jail without charge and being cowardly to stand up to the Jews. You're going to give an account for that and for all the other things that you have done in this life." Paul understood what Felix needed to hear, not what Felix wanted to hear, but what he needed to hear. It gives us an example of how we go and teach other people. Sometimes we go, well, I don't know how to reach this person. First question is to ask is, what do they know? Everyone needs Jesus Christ. Everyone needs to learn about the cross and salvation through Jesus. But it's getting them there. We have to, if someone doesn't know about God, we got to start there. It's no use telling them about Jesus if they don't know about God. If someone knows about Jesus but doesn't know about the one true church, well, we need to start with that. Felix needed to know about righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, and that's what Paul taught. Felix understood it, he trembled, but he didn't obey. The question is, what will we do with the message of the cross? What will we do to obey Jesus?